morning and welcome to Jew in the City Speaks with your host, Allison Josephs, also known as Jew in the City. We've had some really interesting guests on the show over the years, and it's really an exciting place for me to get to talk to people that I might not get to otherwise. And I have to say, I haven't been as excited to speak to a guest on the show for a while, like I am for today's guest. He's a little bit of a rock star right now in the Orthodox Jewish world, although he's not Jewish himself. But he is probably one of the few people out there that's actually given the Orthodox Jewish community a chance to sort of speak in their own words, shine in their own way, and like a little bit of a break. And he's really, from what I've seen from his work, he seems like he's sort of this lifelong truth seeker, really trying to see people for who they are and not how media makes them to be. He's a video maker. His name is Peter Santenello, and he has done a series recently on the Hasidic community in Brooklyn. And he's a little bit of a celebrity right now. So Peter, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So so I was saying before before we started recording, the amount of times that your videos are going around that I'm seeing, being shared on WhatsApp. And if you get shared on WhatsApp in the Hasidic community, you've made it. And just really like a real pride. But I mean, just to people who haven't heard of Peter's videos now, they've, nearly all been viewed, hundreds of thousands of times. How many do you have at this point in the Hasidic community? Probably about 10 or so. Is that the number?
Yeah, roughly that amount. Yeah.
So tell us, I find your sort of, your entry story or your origin story of how you became this video maker to be so inspiring. And as I was reading your bio this morning, when I sort of hear or read about things that I consider truth with a capital T, sort of like those universal human truths, I get this sort of like fuzzy feeling inside. I got that reading about your origin story. So if you could share with us, what was your start in being a person that depicts people sort of in their own setting as they are, as opposed to the media's, spin on that.
Okay, I'll give you the short story here. I grew up in Vermont, and there's not much exposure to anything in Vermont, sort of a bubble. And I was always curious about the outside world. So a big switch happened to me about 4 years ago. Long story to this, we don't have time for it, but I was living in Ukraine. And this opportunity came up where I could live with a family for 6 weeks. I was actually trying to learn Russian really well. And I thought living with a family could be the best thing. This family spoke Russian. Their apartment was bombed out in the war with Russia. So they moved from the front lines basically to a countryside home. And at that time, I'm like, well, why don't I just make a documentary series of this experience and throw it up on YouTube just to, I don't know, I'm interested in the human condition. Why not? And so I made a 6-part series living with this family, and it did well on YouTube. It did well in Ukraine, and it was a huge eye-opening experience for me. I had another business at the time I was running from abroad, but I realized this is the work that really, really grabs me. And it's very interesting. And so one experience I had in that, which probably led me to this Hasidic series, I grew up Protestant, but not very religious. I was sort of rebellious and, tried to avoid everything to do with the church. And I always thought of religion being sort of this silly thing. Here's a book that, redwood trees in California are older than this book. How can you live by these stories? I lived with this family. And well, he was a former drug dealer and they ran into all sorts of problems, but I could see how religion, they were Protestant also, was a huge part in their lives, and like how it was such an amazing guide for them. And I came out of that experience, that probably being my biggest lesson. Like, okay, I get it. Like, I don't have to be a very religious person myself, but I 100% get how religion is important in people's lives and how it can be such a good thing in their lives. So that truly changed my perspective. So fast forward 4 years living in Ukraine, was making video series all over the world, a lot in the Middle East. And the pandemic brought my wife and I home back to the States. And then I'm like, okay, the US has a lot of stories right now, a lot going on here. Americans really don't know much about America, and foreigners don't know much about America. And so Shlomi reached out to me. I guess he was following my content. He said, hey, do you want to get into the Hasidic community? And I said, yeah, wow, that's something that's mysterious to me. All I knew was the Netflix series Unorthodox.
Yeah.
And some Hasidic Jews I saw in airports, that's all I knew. And well, he brought me in, and then the rest is history. Like we got into some very interesting content. So that's my short story, origin story of all this.
Amazing. How, I guess you didn't have a very, maybe a very formed opinion about the Hasidic community. Just before I ask you, I'll just reveal to you that I was always
Sure.
raised Jewish, but I had a very negative
Okay.
opinion of the Hasidic
Yeah.
community. I thought they were
Yes.
backwards, extreme. They were bad to
Yes.
their women. I mean, really, my view of the Hasidic community was unorthodox. I really thought that that spoke for pretty much everyone. Would you
Right.
say that that's sort of, would you say that media, and I guess I want to be careful right now because my organization is actually working with people that have experienced the underbelly of the Orthodox and Hasidic world.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to invalidate their experiences because there are
Mm-hmm.
issues in the Orthodox community like there are in every community. And I
Right.
do want to acknowledge the fact that there are problems that need to be
Mm-hmm.
addressed, and we see those up close. At the same time, what I think is so unfair is sort of the community being seen only for their problems and having those
Right.
stories repeated again and again. So can you share with me sort of what your ideas about the community were before you got to meet them up close and become friends with them?
Yeah, negative like yours, of course. It's always portrayed in a negative light. And I consider myself open-minded, but what does that really mean? Even with that, I'm like, it's probably not, I don't know the words to say, but so cool of a religion when they're that extreme, right? From the
Hmm.
outside, that's how it looked. Uh, but I've learned to judge less, and I think life is growth, and I've made a choice, a conscious choice to do these videos, which actually enable me to experience things that I would not experience on my own. So to me, it was yeah, very negative from the outside, but I always loved the underdog, right? And the Hasidics are
Hmm.
the underdog for sure.
Hmm.
Just like the Iranians, like if I
Hmm.
say Iran anywhere, then it's going to be a negative connotation, or Saudi Arabia. These are countries that I'm not comparing the two, but I'm comparing that they're all
Right.
underdogs. They're all looked
Sure.
received very poorly. And so of course there are problems in the community. I'm no expert on the community. I don't claim to be. I'm no scholar in Hasidim. What I like to do is just let people speak. My job is to open them up, make them feel comfortable enough on camera, and their job is to speak. And if I can capture that, then I got something. And that's the Hasidic world has. Well, I think there are two parts here. The media is given a terrible label from the outside, the Western media, mainstream media, whatever you want to call
Yep.
it, and then the actual community is very closed off, and for
Hmm.
reasons I understand now after spending time there. One, because they know if they open their mouths, it's going to be twisted in a negative way. And two, just by the basic fundamental of the community is, they're, I get the history coming from Europe, and I also get the anti-technology, which is very confusing, right? Because we're online right now. So it depends the person you're talking to, the neighborhood you're
Sure.
in, all this sort of
Yeah.
stuff. And there's so many layers to it. From the outside, it's like Hasidim is one thing,
Correct.
and then you start digging, you're like, wow, okay, Lubavitch sect, Satmar sect, okay, they're much different. It's complicated.
And by the way, when you come back to the New York area, I would like you to maybe consider also doing the Orthodox group because I'm not
Yeah.
Hasidic, but I'm Orthodox, and I would
Okay.
say that Orthodox that's not Hasidic is probably the most invisible because when Jews are depicted in Hollywood, you either have the Jerry Seinfeld, Fran Drescher, like strong New York
Yeah.
accent, and they like the bagels and the boggin, that
Yeah.
thing, or you have the Hasidic Jew who doesn't smile, looks very severe, and it's sort
Yeah.
of this side or that side. And the world that I live in, like my husband and I went to Ivy League colleges,
Okay.
meaning like we're very much involved in the world, but I'm wearing a wig
Right.
right now. So
Yeah.
meaning and that's sort of this interesting balance that basically we are literally invisible in terms of, sort of being in a time now where there's so much more awareness about
Mm-hmm.
inclusivity. Like we talk
Right.
about, like we want people to be seen and heard, and you can't be it if you don't see it. And yet, like, there's certain groups that are so ignored or so, put down over and over again.
Right.
What surprised you the most? You said what you didn't like about them, which is the stuff that I think, is that I don't judge you for thinking that. I thought the same thing. What were some of the most surprising things you discovered getting to actually be with them and spend time
Mm-hmm.
and hear them in their own words?
Well, I think, they have something a lot of the world is missing, a lot of the Western world, which is that deep connectivity. And so I think there is a longing in Western society for those deep bonds. And it seems like they're not having a problem in that community, which I admire. I think it's very cool. I also admire the fact that they're disciplined. Look, to have such strict rules, that takes discipline, and everyone's not going to follow them, and there are all sorts of rebels, I'm sure. But the fact that, they're basically in the heart of capitalism, New York City, and holding on to, staying away from technology to some degree, depending on the person, obviously. And Sabbath or Shabbat, I think that's a beautiful thing. I love that. I mean, that's something everyone could learn from, just stepping away from it all. And you know what? There's an authenticity that I really like. Nobody's putting on a show. They are who they are. That's how I felt, at least. The people I ran into, like, you're not going to get a smile unless it's meant. And coming from Eastern Europe, that's sort of how Ukraine is too. It's like, okay, if someone smiles at you, they mean it. And
That's
there's
an
not really
interesting
any of
point.
this.
I just want to interrupt for a second there. I think culturally they are retaining a lot of that Eastern Europe mentality,
Yeah,
and I think
yeah,
for Americans, like, in terms of being real versus fake, like I remember, I don't even know if the Disney store exists anymore, but years ago I went into the mall and they were like, welcome. And like, they
yeah,
called me their guest. And I'm like, if I'm your guest, then why are you charging me money? Like, what's this whole like fake
right.
thing you're doing here where, you give me this fake welcome because you've been told you have to. At the same time, the truth is that when I see Hasidic men on the street, and again, I'm a kosher eating, Sabbath observing, wig wearing woman,
Okay,
I'm
yeah.
sometimes like, why? You look so serious now. But that's probably a
Oh, yeah.
holdover from, and that's, by the way, for you to even consider that. I never, when I was growing up as a non-observant Jew, I never could have imagined that, I could have been Orthodox myself and not fully like culturally understood another Orthodox group, because, we really actually do live in pretty separate worlds. I've had a chance to meet them, but
Okay.
like I know from the outside looking in, there seems like so much similarity, but we really do live in separate worlds, and we have to
Yeah.
make the effort to build bridges and get to know each other. And I actually think there's a problem that sometimes modern Orthodox, centrist Orthodox, ultra Orthodox, we don't all know each other and give each other the fair
Mm-hmm.
chance. We actually also judge each other by the stereotypes or the worst that we've
Oh,
heard
yeah.
about them. But I think that that's a really interesting point that you bring up, that sort of that more gruff or serious look walking down the street. I would also add that they've been the target of a lot of attacks,
Right.
really forever. So that's sort of like fear of the outside. The problem is
Yeah.
that, like, when you're getting shot down or beaten up or bricks thrown at you, it kind of
Yeah.
also makes it hard for to feel so friendly to the outside world.
Yeah. And so everyone has their own history, and I get it. I don't get it as in I experience it, but I get it as I can understand it. The reason the Hasidic religion, like why they're here, and the way the neighborhoods have formed and stayed very close together, is also a survival mechanism. Some of it's probably very real.
100%.
Some of it's probably very subjective in people's minds. Like maybe the threat isn't as big, or it is bigger. I don't know. I'm not living there, but
I would
I can
say,
see
having
it. I
worked
can
with this
get it.
no, I think that also the memory of Europe, of shtetl life, is a lot sort. It's a
Right.
much of a shorter memory, because my grandfather actually came from Ukraine. He was not Hasidic; he was Orthodox. And
Okay.
when he was
Okay.
12 years old, some local anti-Semites lined up his family to see how many Jews a bullet could go through. And just in the nick of time,
Wow.
Cossacks came riding through and
Wow.
disrupted their impromptu pogrom. But for the rest of my life, my grandfather thought that really all non-Jews would like to line him and his family up and kill them the next time they get a chance. So that's a really
Mm-hmm.
scarring moment when you're like a
Yeah.
kid, to have that.
Yeah.
And so the thing is that my mother was raised in America around non-Jews, and
Uh-huh.
but she was more in a Jewish neighborhood than we were. Even from my sisters and me, our best friends were non-Jewish. So whatever
Okay.
memories my grandfather had, they didn't carry over to future generations, because we had integrated and assimilated into American society and met wonderful non-Jewish people who we saw very much did not want to murder us. But the thing is that if you've been told stories of shtetl life where, Jews
Mm-hmm.
were rounded up and horrible things happened, and then you never got the chance to meet anyone from the outside world, you just sort of like, that's all you know about reality, and that's sort of the memory that you retain.
Yes, I agree. So it's very conscious in the community. I mean, we all carry our past to some degree, right? Like my ancestry came from Europe. nobody moves because things are awesome, right? You move
Correct.
because, unless you're a little bit weird like me, I actually moved to Ukraine, things were good, but I could work from abroad, and that's a whole nother story. But yeah, nobody moves because, it's amazing. So people that move from Europe, and especially the Jews and the Hasidic Jews, came because the circumstances were terrible. And so there's that, I'll make it very quick, but there's that study with the rats, right? And so the rat goes to the cherry scented smell, and the experiment is, once it goes for it, it gets zapped, and it does it about 10 times, and then it doesn't go again. Well, the rat pups and the rat grand pups are adverse to the cherry scent,
Mm.
right? And it's just through, so all this stuff is transgenerational. It takes time, right? I think it takes time to work out, like there's something in our subconscious maybe, and it's survival. Like we're all trying to survive, and that was very clear what happened there. And so, yeah, when it wasn't really that long ago, like I totally understand it now. I
Yeah.
get it. Like I get it. And I respect people. I mean, look, we all got to be kind to each other. And I think there is that rift between American society of, oh, hey, how you doing? It's very open society. And when the
Mhm.
Hasidics aren't like that, I think your average American who knows nothing about them will say, oh, that's rude. They're
Yeah.
being rude. They're being snobby, whatever it might
Mhm.
be. But I get it. It makes sense to me.
There's also, I
Getting
just think, like
better.
different expectations in the Hasidic community about, there's like certain American niceties about like holding on the door, or, I mean, here's one thing that
Right.
I learned that I found fascinating. There, the world used to not be disposable in up until the 1950s, just saved everything, and then everything, had a wrapper.
Yeah.
And this was what a group working with the Haredi population in Israel told me. There was a lot of media messaging done in the 1950s to teach people to throw your garbage in the
Mm.
receptacle, and this never got to the
Oh,
insular
interesting.
Jewish communities. And so what we consider to be totally normal, to throw away a wrapper or garbage like that, it's not part of their sort of known cultural thing, which seems so strange, until this
Right.
organization in Israel is working with a Haredi population to teach them this is actually Jewish value, to put our stuff
Mm.
away. And so it's certain things that could seem so off-putting, but to understand the framework of where people are coming from and give them a little
Mm-hmm.
bit of grace, because the Hasidic community, unlike any other Jewish community, is nearly
Mm-hmm.
100% Holocaust survivors. And this is a
Mm.
fact I only learned recently. Other Jewish
Okay.
populations, secular, modern Orthodox, have varying amounts. For them, the
Okay.
population is nearly 100% survivors and descendants of survivors, and basically, put into a closed system where really that trauma was only interacting with each other. So that's like some
Right.
really intense stuff. Besides just like the trauma passing on through the genes, just sort of the rate and the intensity of it. I want to sort of talk about mainstream media. Why do you
Mm-hmm.
think they get it wrong? I feel like this kinship with you. And look, I've only stayed within my own group. I know I applaud you
Yeah.
for going out and looking to other people, because ultimately, I think this is sort of this shared message, one of those truths again, that we're all different than sort of the stereotypes that people,
Right.
sort of believe that we are. But why do you think mainstream media just continues to get it wrong?
I just don't think they care about, like, we look at media as, okay, they're going to try to make society better and inform us, but it's the opposite actually. They're driven by ad revenue, and they're driven by things that get our attention, and they actually don't use morality in any of their reporting. It's sad.
Mhm.
And this is honestly why I do what I do, just to give humans a voice, people a voice,
So
because
this is
I
the
got
thing.
so annoyed by this.
I feel the same way. And so this is my question. I'm curious what you think about this. I mean, I guess, your reach is in the, hundreds of thousands in video and millions like total. And then, obviously in larger corporations, they have a potentially a much larger reach. Part of me feels like, to do the same boring story of the miserable, ex-Hasidic woman, like, haven't we heard that already? Like, haven't we seen that? Isn't that just a tired trope? Whereas I feel like the content that you put out is so surprising to people. Like, do you know what I'm saying? And
Hmm.
when we think
Right.
about the ad revenue and getting the eyeballs, could content like yours have a place there? If is maybe part of it about education? Because I you've gotten a great amount of interest from the content you put out.
Right. I think there's also an arrogance in it too. Like,
Mhm.
here's the narrative we want to put on you, and there's almost like a better than mentality. And so
Totally.
the the woman's story is the classic one. in
Yeah.
Hasidim, right? The women are suppressed completely and living a terrible life. So why would you give anything positive on that community if that's the only narrative you ever use? So maybe it's that.
Yeah.
And that's not how I feel. I'm sure some women are very much suppressed, and some have written to me saying they are, and some aren't. And it works for some people and it doesn't work for others. I totally get this. I'm not a journalist. My goal is not to like get to the very bottom of the story. My goal is just to let people speak, and I don't have to agree with everything that people say, but I can let them speak, and then the viewer can make their decision of if they agree or not or whatever. And I think that's my purpose.
By the way,
media doesn't care. Media, it pisses me off. Honestly, I get so, because they have a responsibility. Even though I get it, the business model is about ad revenue. They do have a responsibility for our collective psyche, and they're messing with it hardcore. History will judge these people very poorly. Now, there are a few mainstream media journalists that are good, but the vast majority of what the industry is gross.
Garbage. Yeah.
It's garbage.
No,
it's garbage. And a lot of people don't understand this either.
A lot of people don't understand that. And what a lot of people also don't understand, I've tried to explain to members of the Orthodox community that even take a show like Shtisel, which is, also super popular on Netflix. And like the big surprise of Shtisel is that ultra-Orthodox Jews are actually human. Like this is why people are going wild. Oh, they have feelings. Oh, they smile. Like, and the truth is that the first time I saw a modern Orthodox guy who was wearing a black hat on Shabbos smile, I nearly fell off my chair, and I was like, the Rebbe lets you smile? Like, and I look back to now and it seems so insane, but I literally knew so little. But so even though Shtisel does humanize the, Haredi world, it also is a soap opera. So it's showing the most extreme situations, like 15 of them at a time. And it's also depicting literally the second most extreme Haredi neighborhood in the world, Orthodox neighborhood in the world. And when I've tried to explain to other Orthodox Jews that ends up sort of speaking to all of us, that we will, even though we're not living lives that are nearly as isolated or nearly as stringent or extreme, ultimately people will see that way of life and think that, and I have friends that are Jewish and have seen my journey from, a non-observant Jew to a modern Orthodox, centrist Orthodox Jew. And they thought that my life was shtisel because they still couldn't really tell the difference. And I think the fact, as you're saying, that people really trust what they see in the media. I've also had journalists ask me questions, and I've explained to them how things actually are, according to my own perception of the Orthodox world. And then they'll twist my words to actually fit what they want to say, as opposed to, I would argue that you're letting people just talk as they are is actually so much more, journalism than the reporter or the journalist that inserts their own bias or opinion into it. Because at least just letting the person be as they are, the viewer gets to decide. There was a story in NBC where they first spoke to a bunch of people that had left the Hasidic world from super extreme situations where literally even the word gymnasium was removed from their textbooks. I mean, this extreme. They brought a Lubavitch rabbi to speak about his life, and they literally cut and paste the words he said to make him say things that he had not said. He fortunately brought along a tape recorder and he recorded his words. But they specifically wanted their agenda to come out. So it's pretty vile.
Yeah, it's terrible. I mean,
can you share this?
What can you do?
5 minutes left to go.
Yeah, sure.
I think we can help to amplify your reach, and we can thank you for your service, because I think the more people like you that go out there and look for a more authentic story and tell it and spread it, at least gives people a chance. We just have a few minutes left now, but can you share with us some people, some non-Orthodox Jews or non-Jews, some of the nicest feedback that you've gotten from sharing these videos?
Oh yeah, like a lot of people written in the comments, like, I didn't know about Hasidim. Thank you for bringing us into that world. I really respect their lifestyle, or many positive, and a lot of comments from a Muslim audience saying we have very similar values and traditions, which is true.
Yeah.
Like, it's unbelievable how closely they're aligned. And so Judaism and Islam, Christianity's in the middle, right? Is in chronological order, but I
Right.
see a lot of more parallels between Judaism and Islam.
Well, look, we're
Which is
cousins.
crazy.
We share.
Yeah.
It's two brothers that sort of split off. And yes, we've also gotten comments like that. And I would say that's another population that has been misunderstood. And there's all different groups. And we've heard from people on our channels also very heartwarming comments from people. And really, it's I think that point of shared humanity and seeing each other past the labels and past the biases. And like you said, I don't think the point actually is that we have to ultimately agree with everyone or, make the same choices in how they live, but at least to, sort of see them. Oprah did a segment in the Hasidic population, and you have an understanding now of how Satmar and Chabad are different. And I appreciate that. She went and found a Chabad family where the kids had never heard of Mickey Mouse. You couldn't find, I don't know of such a family that exists, because Chabad is a very plugged in and sort of, connected to community, but she somehow found sort of like, and I think because there is this desire in mainstream media to sort of show the weirdest, like, we're going to take you into this really far off world. Come with our cameras. We got access to the Hasidim, and, we'll take you where, and as opposed to, I think you treat your subjects just like human beings, and then their humanity is able to shine.
I try. It's not as exciting, maybe. Maybe that stuff's more exciting. Bullets and blood and drama is always way more exciting. But,
I think actually surprising people and finding that common bond is really, I think that's the stuff that fills my heart up. That's the stuff that like makes me feel that sort of bigger connection, that we're all one and that we're all sharing this planet together. So it's really, I'm, and I saw your other story online that you wanted to read about the Soviet Union when you were 8, because it was the group you weren't supposed to hear about, and you became fascinated with the, sort of the other. And so it really seems like you have this lifelong mission to tell the stories that don't get told. So I don't know like where you are in your own spiritual journey, but I hope that I believe in God. I hope that God will give you, many more years of health and the ability to continue to share these stories. And I can just tell you the community is so grateful for you giving us the chance to speak. And when you're back in New York City, we would totally love to take you to our world.
Can I have time for one more thing to say about the community?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What I really enjoyed there was just the lack. I'm an outsider. I don't know what's really going on, but the lack of anxiety on the streets. I live in San Francisco. Everyone's so scared of each other. No one's looking at each other. It's terrible right now. And I just felt like I had to go to the heart of the Hasidic world to feel free again. I mean, what's going on? That's the opposite of what we would think, right? But I'm like, there's the people's pressure is off. Most of them have had COVID. Most of them have been through the journey. Here, everyone's overly paranoid, like running across the street. Everyone's got a mask on. It's just, it was like refreshing to be there.
All right. Well, I'm glad that there's a positive story to come out of that too, because it's also made a lot of negative headlines. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you for your truth seeking and your great storytelling, and you should have continued success.
Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate for having me on.
Yeah. Okay. All the best. And thank you for listening. You can catch us same time, same place next week. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone.